I don't know kama ni former deputy president mi sijui tuko wapi.
One couldn't imagine that we could return to such toxic ethnicity so quickly.
Yes. The form of democracy that was dumped in Africa and told this is how you should govern, that if you're a what do you call it? If you're a tyrant, we will tell the whole world you're a tyrant and try and remove you from power so that we can instill a democratic leader. I wonder whether this form of governance is tenable.
It is treasonous to imagine the death of the president.
Yeah.
Shoop.
Welcome to Politikali Konekted, a podcast on everything politics and governance in Kenya and Africa. We unpack the complexities of people, policy, and power. I'm your host, Diana Ngao,
AKA Madam Speaker, and I am Chaka,
AKA the Bishop. If you haven't already, I don't even know what you're waiting for, but subscribe, because this train is moving and we want to ensure that you are connected and stay connected politically. So make sure you hit the subscribe button even before we go anywhere into this episode. Subscribe and follow us on all our social media channels. So in today's episode, we're discussing the connection between power and the law. Mm-hmm. Often, most people don't think that these things are connected. But in reality, they're actually Siamese twins. So with the current events that are happening and at play in Kenya, a lot of it is seeing the intersection of where politics and the law marry. Amaje, Bishop.
Yeah, I think people are even tired of seeing lawyers now.
Yeah.
They always seem to be entering center stage whenever political tensions are quite high.
Yeah. It's true. And I also think the current times in Kenya is also forcing us to also apply a legal mind. When you're reading the bills, when you're listening to the court proceedings, sometimes it is forcing the public to now become apply a legal mind or a legal lens into seeing things.
Yeah, we do have to apply our legal minds. I think for a long time, people were used to relying on leading figures to interpret things for us.
Yeah.
But now Kenyans are being forced to be like, in the Bible, there were these people who were known as the Berean Jews. And they were praised that unlike other communities, when they would hear the word, they would not just take it at face value. They would go to scripture and confirm, even though inasema kweli. So Kenyans now have to be like Berean Jews. Si kusomewa, pia wanaenda kwa katiba na wanasema we the people shall.
Mandatory.
Mandatory.
Article 1.
Yeah. Katiba ni yetu sisi sote.
Yeah, and I mean, I think for us to really understand what is happening, we must also look in history. Because, to be honest, Chaka, when I watched I don't know, kama ni former deputy president, mi sijui tuko wapi. But when I was watching the court proceedings, I felt a bit lost because I wasn't really understanding what happens at the courts, even if they say his impeachment is flawed. Does that make him remain as deputy president, or what happens now to Kindiki because he's been appointed and it was wasn't it gazetted?
Yes.
Yeah, it was. So he's just awaiting swearing in. So he's the deputy president. Now
designate.
Not designate. I was about to say elect, but he wasn't elected. Yeah. So now, exactly what happens, and it's really seeming like this big cloud that we just can't see through. So I'm wondering, how would you help not just me, but also our audiences better understand or even forecast where we are at and what could possibly happen?
There are very many things at play. First of all, there are several court cases in court right now. But starting from the point about former deputy president designate. The whole point of what are known as conservatory orders is the recognition that certain decisions, once implemented, have such huge ramifications and implications for country that, first of all, reversing them is impossible because you can't undo some of the things that have been done. Or even if you were to reverse, in a sense of reverting to what was there before, it's already had certain impacts that can't be undone. So you say issue conservatory orders to maintain status quo. Like it's like pressing pause.
On the process that we cannot move forward, we cannot move back.
Because of the impact that it will have. Let's take a moment to think about this. So that's the whole idea. And there are different types of conservatory orders, but that's the whole essence of it. So for example, let me use an unrelated example. Tuseme uko na deni, and now auctioneers are coming.
Yes.
And let's say it's your car or your shamba which has been attached, and it's going to be sold. The thing is, once it has been sold, see, there's somebody who's now a buyer who has paid money and they bought it in good faith. Undoing it becomes very problematic. So before that is effected, pause kidogo.
Let's think about how to manage this.
You come saying that, look, if you come and say this is very urgent, if you don't stop this, I shall suffer serious damages, or the country will be impacted in a certain way. So just pause kidogo. And that's why sometimes you can even secure those orders from court, what they call ex parte, even when the other person isn't there. Because you're saying just stop the process while that other person is coming, then we can have a conversation. So in fact, what we've been seeing
is a conversation.
It's a conversation because we haven't even started talking about the issue of whether the impeachment is valid. It's the technicalities surrounding how this issue will be listened to for the composition of
the 3-judge panel.
Yes. Because there were issues surrounding, initially empanelment was to come from the Chief Justice, which is Article 165.4. And we had a date for Thursday. Then between Friday night and Saturday, it's the Deputy Chief Justice who's empaneled, and now we're in court on Tuesday. Why has it been fast forwarded? So discussing the technicalities around that has been just setting the ground rules. I can see how politics has a play into this, because it seems that, or in my opinion, it seems that the whole impeachment process was on a certain timer. It was a timer that, this thing needs to be done before Mashujaa Day, which was 20th, it was Sunday. And I remember even on social media, there were accounts that aligned to the executive that were like, the new deputy president designate will be sworn in by 2 p.m. tomorrow, that we're even looking at the stadium to see it seemed that there was a timer. So from your explanation of the law, the conservatory orders, and then now the issue between the empanelment of the 3-judge bench, it seems that politics came into play. And that is what now they're discussing. Yes. And it was also politics which got us here. And I think there are so many also other factors surrounding it, because the longer it takes, this is debatable, but the longer it takes for the deputy president designate to be sworn in, the more complex and murky it becomes, the more questions are being raised. But you see, if the person has already been sworn in, we can have a discussion about whether it was right, and then in future tutarekebisha. But before this person is sworn in, and more issues keep being raised, it becomes trickier and trickier
to actually swear him in.
Exactly.
So we start having a vacuum that we have a president with no deputy.
And that's a national security issue. So, and that is also very political because heaven forbid anything happens, then you have a very another unprecedented situation where the next in the order of succession is the speaker of the National Assembly. And putting that in the political context, I think we are hearing statements about
him being removed from office.
And warnings are already being issued about. So there's so many things at play. Coming back to the point about the longer this takes, the more complex it becomes, is now you also have the issue of if an order is given by the High Court, do we then go to once we finish the High Court, do we go to the Court of Appeal? Do we go to the Supreme Court? How long will that take? So there were arguments about it going directly to the Supreme Court in the same way you do for a presidential petition. There are issues to do with the IEBC. We saw the later nominating Professor Kindiki
saying that he has passed through the cleared
by the IEBC, but we also have court decisions saying that if you don't have commissioners in place, the commission can't act even if you have a secretariat in place. So there are so many prickly points that are emerging.
Yeah, but as you were talking, I was just also appreciating something. I was appreciating the 2010 Constitution because it seems that in this period where we have a regime, in the last episode we talked about examining the regime or the person in power based on their character. And what we've seen in this 2010, why I'm saying I have an appreciation of the 2010 Constitution is because it has been stress tested in the past 2 years, and more so in the last 4 or 5 months since the protests in June. It has really been stress tested, but it still remains firm. And if anything, I think that we could have really been in a worse situation if it was not for the separation of powers or what is in the Constitution, because sometimes what is in the Constitution is really not what is applied. But the separation of powers between the executive, the legislator, and the judiciary, and how now the judiciary, where we're saying how politics and law marry, is that how now the judiciary has to come and clean this political mess that the legislator or the executive seem to have created. And I'm saying created because we all watched that impeachment process. It was
and the thing is, on the one hand, yes, the judiciary can clean it up, or it can also compound the problem.
Yeah.
And the thing about this constitution, what you've said is a great source of hope in terms of the principles that underpin the constitution, separation of powers, and checks and balances. But the thing about the constitution is that it doesn't interpret itself, it doesn't implement itself.
It is us who interpret it.
It's us who interpret it.
Yeah.
And we are influenced. These office holders are not living oblivious to the context of the times.
That's true.
They're not blind to the realities that are being balanced.
That's true, because although even with the principles of the checks and balances that are in the Constitution, we've seen it at play in very many times where certain places seem captured. Like I want to say something, and it's a hot take, so don't crucify me. But when the senator of Nakuru was giving her submissions on the impeachment motion in decision in Senate, she starts talking about we should have gone to Moi days, where the president could hire and fire at will.
I wish we can go back to the Moi regime, where they used to be sacked and nothing changes. They hire as another one tomorrow, the following morning.
And to me that was such a shocking statement. And she goes ahead and even says that, it is the president who told us that he's unhappy with this guy. So I'm like, the audacity to tell us that an institution that is supposed to be removed, like checking the executive or checking, for Senate it's checking the counties, but to hear that the executive has influence in their decisions, I'm like, ni kama either hawajasoma constitution ama they just do not respect it. Because to me that was like, I remember I just tweeted, I'm like, did she just admit that? Is she aware of what she just said? And she went on radio again.
Yes.
After the fact, after she said that, she went on radio again and said the exact same thing. And to me, I was just, I couldn't believe it. And as much as I have so much admiration of the 2010 Constitution, I think what you said is also very true, that it is us, the people, who interpret it.
I'll tell you what I do admire about, whether I agree with the thinking or not. What I admire about her blatantly revealing that pressure or influence is at least she was honest about it. Because there are very many players in these institutions who would pretend very well that no conversations are being had behind the scenes. So at least that brutal honesty means we can have a conversation about it.
Yeah, like the
and call it out.
That's true. We appreciate the honesty, because also we saw when there was the Broadway's government, where ODM was like, we have nothing to do with that. Those people went on their own knee, and we're like, that is not honest. And
especially after we saw the proceedings in Senate.
Yeah, that was not honest. And anyway, it's true. But I want us to take something that Senator Tabitha Karanja said, is that we should go back to the Moi days. Where a president could hire and fire. It seems that this deputy president seat, or back then in Moi's time, before the 2010 Constitution, it was vice president, always seems to be so contentious. They just keep on locking heads all the time. And I can only remember a peaceful time between president and vice president, which was between Kibaki and Kijana Wamalwa. And then subsequently during the Grand Coalition, it was Kibaki and Kalonzo. But otherwise, Chaka, in our whole history, vice presidents are either fighting the president or the president fighting the vice president. What is it about the seat that we're unable to, or rather implement, because it's already written in our laws that the president must have an assistant? What is it that creates this? Is it the politics? Is it not just only the politics? Maybe there are other factors involved that make this so contentious. Because to me, how I see this is that the impeachment of the deputy president has set a precedent. Whether it's a bad president or a good president, we will know until the next person is going to be impeached, right? So what do you think it is that makes this seat, or this relationship between president and his principal assistant almost untenable?
I think it goes to the heart of our theme for today's episode, and that's the interplay between politics and the law. And sometimes that interplay is symbiotic, sometimes it's tenuous. Because what's happening here is the law says one thing about the office of the deputy president, but our politics says another thing about the office of the deputy president. And what do I mean? I mean that our politics, given how it's influenced by ethnic consideration, numbers, and what you bring to the table-ism. Then on the other hand, the Constitution is clear-cut. You're the principal assistant to the deputy president, and you're supposed to act on his behest when called upon. And this might sound, but you're a very expensive spare.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's that book by Prince Harry called Spare, where he was saying that, his father said that Prince William was the heir and he was the spare. So that's why that book is called Spare, by the way.
Guy, chest pains.
So in our context, constitutionally, the DP is a very expensive spare.
Yeah.
So now we've gone on to enhance it a little bit. You don't see this in the constitution, but in our laws, you see the deputy president chairing the intergovernmental relations with counties
IBEC.
and the like, IBEC. So we've enhanced it a bit. And the president may elect to give certain roles to the DP, but that's again at his behest. So, but the reality of our politics is that this office holder and the people behind this office holder come from the place of this is how we got you into power.
We brought
this is
something
what
to the table that
this
if it
is
was
what
not
is owed to us. And and that's why now we even hear the former not former deputy president saying,
we are not sure.
We got you into power, but you just used us to bring the mountain on board. And
and now
in the previous dispensation, you saw that during the first term, it was, in a sense, following the history of coalitions, TNA and URP. Before you now have Jubilee in 2017. So again, you have this, and it created this sense of a co-presidency.
Yeah.
I hazard to say that, even initially you hear Uhuru Kenyatta, when he comes into office, is using the language of we and us, but quickly realizing, hey, I need to take charge, and start saying my government. Which is proper. That's how it should be.
Yeah, because he is head of government.
Buck stops with the president.
Yeah.
So I think that's what we are seeing. That's in recent history. Going back to the previous constitution, you also had a bit of that because you had very heavyweight political figures.
Yes.
So remember, you have our first president is a political heavyweight.
Yeah.
Our first vice president is another political heavyweight.
And actually how he became president was, or rather how there seemed to be some consensus. It was more like a consensus based on all the people who were pushing or agitating for independence. They were like, we have to wait for Kenyatta.
Actually, even and to take it a step further and to give credit to Jaramogi, some of us may take it for granted that many people know this, but that presidency had been offered to Jaramogi.
Yeah.
When Jomo Kenyatta was still
in Kapenguria.
Yeah. So, and he turned it down and said, no.
We want all of them free.
Not just that, but Kenyatta should be president, and because he's our political teacher. So he actually, it could have been him. He could have been the first president. So you can now imagine when Kenyatta is president and Jaramogi is
feeling slighted.
He was also not a small person politically.
Yeah, he wasn't.
He was the doyen of politics as well. So, and we even see him now taking the high road of resigning and saying, by the way, I don't need this. If we're not going to do it right. And then, so subsequently, you see President Moi, and now, and he was also a heavyweight in his own, because he was part of the Kadu elite.
Yeah.
But now the people around Mzee Kenyatta are feeling that this is a small person, and they could talk down to him, and they could, in fact, there were ministers really who publicly would talk down on Moi, and that's when you even see them. They like the likes of Dr. Njoroge Mungai, Kihika Kimani, the governor's father. There were even incidents, where they really did speak out against him. And that's the time when you have the Change the Constitution movement, because they're like, okay, Mzee is not getting any younger.
And his health is failing.
The Constitution is saying this guy automatically
ascends to president.
Yeah, so they start trying to change the Constitution.
So really, Chaka, what you're saying, because what I'm hearing you say is that history is maybe not 100% repeating itself, but it's so similar.
It rhymes.
It really rhymes, because we have a history where we have a very recent history after now Jomo and Jaramogi, where MPs and other people are talking badly about either the president or the deputy president. And it seems for me, the thread that I'm tying here is that all this is tied to us seeing things as a tribal lens, right?
Yes.
Because the people, although Jaramogi was kind and very magnanimous to be like, I'm going to wait for Kenyatta. We have to wait for Kenyatta to come back because he is the designate president. And I'm guessing everyone also had ambitions at that time. These people at that time had gone to Lancaster. I'm sure also Tom Mboya had ambitions.
Definitely.
Yeah. So it was very magnanimous for Jaramogi to be like, we are waiting for our leader. And then they come into some sort of arrangement, I'm guessing, that now Jaramogi deputizes him. And then now all of a sudden a certain region starts feeling like, why mbona tunachezwa, or another, while the other region is seeing that they are enjoying the perks of someone being in power. And I feel like that relationship between Jomo and Jaramogi really set the domino effect to where we are at today.
I'll want to add that the thing about ethnicity, and much as it's been made such a dirty word, I'd like to suggest that there's positive ethnicity and there's negative ethnicity. There's a way we can celebrate ethnicity, but there's a way it can be misused.
Yeah.
And I would hazard to say that people did not decide for themselves to become ethnically factionalized.
Yes.
And actually what was happening were the decisions made by key leaders then trickle down, and then it becomes a culture, and then it becomes difficult to undo. Because between Mzee and Jaramogi, at the time, it's not like right now when you can pick up your phone and send a WhatsApp message or make a call. There are people surrounding these offices who are also manipulating situations, giving wrong information. Jaramogi is in bed with the Russians.
Yeah.
And, why he wants to bring communism.
Yeah.
And the people who have been sponsored. So twisting facts, and then there's suspicion, and choices are being made that can't be undone. There are people around presidents who are overzealous, and people might even think that it's the president acting when
it is
people who've been given so much leeway that make certain major decisions. We heard about some of the things that the people like the Total Man did. There were key figures around these presidents who would make certain key decisions. See, for example, that time for the Change the Constitution movement, Dr. Njoroge Mungai, who is a brilliant man, of his own accord, was also related to the president.
And for our audiences, the Change the Constitution movement was happening towards the end of the 60s, right?
Actually, it's in the mid 70s.
Mid 70s is when it starts coming up prominently.
And the sole aim of the Change the Constitution movement was to change that provision that says that upon the demise of the president, the vice president comes into office for automatically for 90 days.
Okay.
And so they wanted to make it a process through a complex process that Parliament would now pick somebody.
Oh, they didn't even want to go to a fresh election?
Not immediately.
Not
So you have a
immediately.
placeholder.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what the exact provisions of the proposals were. I don't know if there are records of that, but at least we know those were the facts surrounding it.
Yeah.
So, and Jonjo put a stop to it by saying it is treasonous to imagine the death of the president.
Yeah.
Shoop. Everybody maintained shut up after that.
And let me ask you, I hear you on there's positive ethnicity and there's negative ethnicity. If anything, we should celebrate our diversity. But at the same time, we are all Kenyan. Was the change a constitution movement? Was it majority comprised of people from Mount Kenya region, or not allies of people who were seen to be allies of the president? Because I'm thinking about someone who's from a minority community. Even if the principle was like, I don't think we thought about this law well, let's change it so that we can have a more inclusive way of choosing who succeeds to power. But then if I'm seeing that majority of them are coming from a certain clan or tribe, on my end now I start saying,
Actually, that's the point exactly. The Change the Constitution movement was almost exclusively a Gema affair. But that's the point that, you see, because of the choices and actions of these leaders, those choices then trickle down to the people, that it then becomes a culture.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the people who came saying that that vice president is going to be a problem. It was people who wanted to retain power.
Yeah.
They're like, if Mzee is not here, we're in trouble. So let's get this guy out of the way. And so
again, using the law for politics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you see that right now, I mean, with some of the utterances that have been there, part of our popular lexicon is don't touch Morema. But it's now becoming a thing where, the current politics has been so ethnicized around this one figure who has, one couldn't imagine that we could return to such toxic ethnicity so quickly.
Yes.
But you can see the choices being made at the top are impacting how the rest of Kenyan society are viewing our politics. And now, with that in mind, you see policymakers, leaders, therefore, wanting to put in place certain decisions, certain measures. The tools that they have are, statutes, policies,
the law,
executive orders.
the tools that they have.
And that's how they can give expression to their views, their biases, and the like, even though they might couch it in a language that is palatable, but truly the intention might be ulterior.
Yeah, that's true. And I'd say the tools that they have is the law, but in this day and age, it's the law and the media. Because the media is the one that is able to really completely disseminate this thinking to the masses. And sometimes it is so filtered that by the time it gets to one person who now becomes a mashabiki on TV giving their comment, they don't realize that you're just regurgitating something that you may have no full understanding.
Yes.
As where this is coming from. So
precisely.
For sure, I agree. I'm just adding that the media, the law and the media is now being used for political, can I say political management or? Yeah. Hi. Interesting.
So you see that, for instance, one of the things we said, I think, in the last episode when we're discussing the constitutional amendment number 2 bill of 2024 is that most people are aware of that Chararge bill only on the point of this proposed 7-year term.
Yeah.
But we saw that there were actually several provisions.
Yeah.
So what is also highlighted in the another thing, I was having a discussion with a senior lawyer about this, is that if you watch our news right now, every day there's the news has become dark once more. It's murder, death, and killings, and
That's true.
part of the effect of
Abductions.
that is that people have fatigue. And so it becomes even difficult to have a discussion about policy in such an environment. And it has an impact on engagement, which has an impact on accountability, and which has an impact on how much discretion the powers that be then have to do as they will.
But really, as much as it's on news, yes, for sure, we are having serious issues with our security in terms of the number of deaths and and murders and abductions that are happening. Yes, but there's also something that is also keeping us fatigued. Is that when you are trying to do something and you don't want people to shout at you are doing, you find devious ways of distracting these people. Case in point, when you have young kids, they try and sneak away to do something and distract you with, oh, look at this, while they're trying to pick something or switch on the TV, something. So I'm seeing part of the lethargy that people are feeling is that also there've been so many distractions thrown at their faces. Hadi, you're not even sure which one is real and which is Nini. And then the media has a part to play because the media is not able to decipher and say, this is the focus, this is the direction we're going. They're just feeding it to us just the way it comes. As it comes, it's fed into us. And by the time you watch the 20 minutes of news. Okay, actually, people don't even watch news. By the time you scroll like twice on your device, whether it's on X or on Facebook or Instagram or even TikTok now that has become a bit politicized, you're already tired. You're like, guy.
On that point, let me plant a seed.
Yeah.
I won't expound too much on it, but the context being, a lot of the darkness we're seeing on news, the security situation, a point to consider is how fear can be used as a tool to achieve political aims.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Because when you read Noam Chomsky and some of his readings, he says in many of his books that power is not easily opposed. And it's very costly to oppose power because what the powers that may be, they don't want to leave that seat. And perhaps we may have many problems, but they do not want to fix the problems. And the moment you realize that these people do not want to fix the problem, we start shouting about it. And what do? They use different tools. They can use the law by amending the laws to make sure people don't have the right to organize and speak out, freedom of speech. The second thing they'll use is, if that doesn't stop you and you find other ways, the second thing they use is fear. So, we saw how abruptly the 25th of June stopped the protest. It was not about the occupying of parliament. It was the casualty that had amounted. And, people are now scared. You're not sure whether you're going to get back home. I remember being in the streets then, and there were so many rounds of bullets that even later on when we were with a group of friends. Later on, when we walked and we were like, okay, let's grab something to eat here. There was a construction site right next, and there was a big boom, and all of us were like shaken.
Trauma.
The trauma of it. So, of course, the fear. And then the next time, I remember the next Thursday, there was also a call to go to the streets. But after seeing what we saw on the 25th, no one. The fear of not being sure whether you'll go back home. And of course, that means they achieved the objective that make people fearful to not want to exercise the right. So fear is such a, it's supposed to be a tool that helps us preserve ourselves as humans. Like when you see danger, you're meant to feel fear so that you can run away from it. But then also now in this political context, it is used to suppress and control and ensure that, until now we are back to being spectators. And Chomsky says it so brilliantly at how in this arena, we are not meant to be the players. The public, the masses are not supposed to be the players. They are meant to be the spectators. And the players use so many different kind of tools to keep the spectators in their seat without going anywhere. Don't try and cross the field. Like a match. Don't try and cross the field. Don't try and talk to the players in the field. Don't try and get people to want to exchange players.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it's in that context of fear that courage enters the group chat.
Yeah.
The courage to question, the courage to ask. And, as you bring up Noam Chomsky, one of the things that really defined his public intellectualism is that he refused to see certain actions of government in isolation, and therefore people would see certain actions as the exception. So, for instance, during the Vietnam War, people were, presenting it as a costly mistake that the government had made entering this war. But Chomsky was coming and saying, no, it was not a mistake. There's a pattern here. It's very deliberate. And there are other things going on behind the scenes that may not be apparent. So don't look at it in the isolation of what's happening. Look at it in the bigger context and identify the pattern of the things that are happening.
Yeah.
And they may say that they are fighting for one thing, liberty, democracy, but in reality, there's a military-industrial complex. There's the money that's being made from the
There's
war
a lot of
and
money
the
being
likes.
made,
There's controlling developing countries and a new kind of imperialism.
Yeah.
So there's a pattern, and so drawing inspiration from that. And one of the reasons we look to history, as politically connected, is identifying those patterns and how that history rhymes to inform where we're at, so that when we see certain actions happening now, yes, they're happening in an environment where we are seeing the unprecedented, an impeachment of a DP, the first time it's happening. But when we take a step back, we've been able to identify certain themes, that there's a tenuous relationship between presidents and their DPs in the political context, that the law is often used to achieve political aims, in very clever and cunning ways. And so being alive to that then puts us in a position where in the face of that fear that is being sold to us, I
has
think
to be courage.
there's that saying that I will not be sold for fear. It's a bad translation, but I will not be sold for fear. It's in the face of that fear that is being sold that, courage enters the group chat.
Courage must enter the group chat because it's even in our constitution. If you read the wordings that the people are sovereign and they may exercise their right directly or indirectly, is just if you read those words, they just speak of courage. And it must be courageous of us as a people to either exercise our power or to be sovereign.
And it's interesting because we live in a time where, unlike before, we now have very many tools to be able to be informed on how to exercise that power, whether directly or indirectly, by keeping our leaders accountable. We live in an age of information. We have technology. We have various media outlets and platforms to express ourselves. It therefore becomes quite unfortunate if we still remain spectators as of the days of VOK and KBC, when we could only sit and see what's being reported on lunchtime news and being decided by editors. Now, citizens, there's citizen media and people are
reporting
peer-to-peer. And that's where, in light of this constitution, public participation enters the chat. There's one of our subscribers who was asking, we hear you talking about public participation. And but okay, now that we know it's important, how do we go about it?
Yes. Yeah. And it was shocking to hear that a lot of people do not know how to participate publicly.
Yes.
I mean, how to participate, because I remember the audio was like, how do I public participate? Where do I get the information? And it was nice to hear that more and more people are looking for this information.
For civic engagement. Yeah. And part of the beauty is that so the law isn't just used to achieve political aims. Actually, that's not its main intention. In law we also see progress. So now one can even send an email to Parliament, to Senate or the National Assembly, in addition to writing letters, in addition to memoranda. So there are multiple avenues. It's not necessarily one prescribed way, but that's the reason it becomes more unfortunate if we don't utilize those avenues. Like I think I've seen something going viral, which is screenshots of an email that was sent by Janet Mbugua. Yeah,
a template of how you can just participate in the public participation, like send your insights. So it's like a template, and then you can add your name and say, this is why I reject this bill. Yes. And it's quite simple, because also we live in a world where things are made convenient, so no one really wants to go the extra mile. So I found it quite innovative that someone was able to come up with a template, and it's now on a link, and you share it. I actually did it. You share it, and it automatically opens on your email app, and then if you want to add anything, you can add, and then you share it.
We have no excuse.
We have no excuse, absolutely. Yeah. But I would like to get your take on something interesting. Just a thought that I have. In terms of the ways we govern, there are different ways. There's democracy, there's authoritarianism, so now that our favorite politician keeps saying that we are a democratic country and we're governed by the rule of law. But more and more I'm seeing is that the more people stand for such democratic ideals of justice, of equality, of rule of law, the more we see the democratic space shrinking. And in what Noam Chomsky says is that power is costly to oppose. So in a democratic setting, my question is, when more and more people wake up and be like, we want to participate in this arena of politics. We want what the Constitution has said that, there must be civic education, there must be civic engagement, there must be public participation. We are going to tell you what to do. We are going to be participatory in terms of how we want to govern ourselves. Before, there used to be so much trust that when I elect this person, the next time I want to hear from you is in 5 years, because I have the trust that you'll get things done. Now that there's so much mistrust and people are saying that it seems that we have to do this ourselves, do you think the democratic space will continue shrinking, or does this progress the democratic ideals? That is what I'm wondering. I'm trying to see how, because I have a very controversial take. I feel like democracy, or the model of democracy, was just dumped in Africa, and not bearing in mind the kind of nuances that for us in Africa, like you find countries with so many different tribes and in one region. You find a country that may be majority of a certain tribe, and you also find countries in Africa that have 3 or 4 or 2 different main religions, So I have wondered whether the form of democracy that was dumped in Africa and told this is how you should govern, that if you're a what do you call it? If you're a tyrant, we will tell the whole world you're a tyrant and try and remove you from power so that we can instill a democratic leader. I wonder whether this form of governance is
Tenable.
yeah, it's tenable.
There are a number of things, and I like at the tail end you've talked about this form of democracy.
Yeah.
Because it's not democracy in and of itself, but it's the form that it takes. And Baba Olusegun Obasanjo has often, not Baba,
Yeah, Baba.
has often said on quite a number of times that Western liberal democracy is not well suited for Africa. Because when we look at democracy in and of itself, the word from the Greek means rule by the people. Demos and krasia, they are two separate words brought together. So it's the whole idea of popular government, by the people, of the people, by the people, for the people. So, and actually that democracy is the whole idea behind public participation. But Western liberal democracy, it takes on a form that was influenced by their culture.
Yeah.
Because even when you look at Africa, we had our systems and traditions also had sort of consensus. And
yes.
It had its faults as well, but there was still that coming together. And so, and that history still influences how we view things. We see tradition and culture still having such a central role. So Western liberal democracy was influenced by their political culture. So when you look at the British Empire, who were our colonial subjugators, they had a monarchy, democratic monarchy at some point later, when they later got a parliament. So you still had the queen as sovereign, right? In contradistinction to we the people are sovereign currently. But anyway, you had the queen as sovereign. And then you had a prime minister who was appointed by the queen from parliament, which is part of what is being proposed to be brought now. Through this constitutional amendment number 2 and also in BBI. But it was the queen appointing this prime minister. In Kenya now, if it goes through, it would be the president appointing the prime minister. But then you had Her Majesty's loyal opposition, right? But it was still Her Majesty's. And the opposition was still loyal.
And loyal opposition, it is such a... I'm just like, what?
And I suppose it was part of the aim was to maintain that sort of unity in the sovereign. It isn't an opposition that is meant to bring
that
about
is disloyal.
Anarchy. So, in our context, if we try and now think about this majority leader and minority leader, you can see, under the previous constitution, you had president who was an MP, had to be an MP. But you also had the official leader of opposition. So you can see the tentacles of Western liberal democracy. But when you're also dealing with the reality of our history of a nation made of many nations. Already you're dealing with the challenges of achieving cohesiveness. And now, as you're trying to achieve this cohesiveness of all these ethnic communities coming together to be one nation, and then now you're introducing this form of political division, it makes it murky.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, in fact, that's why, though it later was used for oppression, That's why the one party rule had proponents. Like even people like Julius Nyerere was a proponent of the one party state. And the rationale was noble. How, again, some of these things, what is intended and how they are used are two different things.
Yeah.
Remember, Julius Nyerere Mwalimu was for things like ujamaa.
Yeah, communist
You see Tanzania
ideals.
all speaking Swahili, and it was about bringing people together. And so the one-party state was supposed to reflect this African socialism ideal, which was part also of African socialism was there during it was a political philosophy of our founding fathers as well. But now in Kenya, we see one-party state coming after the 1982 coup as a way to suppress opposition.
Yeah.
But really, the one-party state was supposed to say that we are one. So even when we are having a debate within the party, it's a system that allows representation, because ultimately that's what it's supposed to be. As people, we are delegating power to our leaders to represent our interests. So it doesn't become about wewe ni chama ile, mimi ni chama hii. It becomes about division. Those are some of the...
Do you think that perhaps we should evolve to a two-party state and it's based on ideology as opposed to based on regions? Or that my party has dominance in this region and your party has dominance in this region, so that we can get a collective let us marry. We talked about political marriages. Let us marry our chamas and become one coalition that later somewhere divorces. Do you think perhaps we should evolve our politics or our representation into ideologies, and people are like, okay, my ideology is based on this, and maybe for sake, because I haven't really thought completely, like, let's say in terms of my ideology is more capitalistic, and then I have someone who's more socialist, and is like, we should socialism, like a mix of socialism and capitalism into this. So would you think some of our issues in terms of the diversity that sometimes play a part in our politics, where it is now positive ethnicity that is used negatively, do you think that perhaps this could be cured by having parties based on ideology and capping it to two?
But part of the challenge you have there is that system of leaning on ideologies will encounter what philosophers sometimes call the human problem. Because the thing is, you may say, yes, that we are pegged on this ideology. The challenge is, even when you use that as a starting point, because of human... not qualities, human nature, things such as greed, self-ambition, they find a way to creep in and have that ideology suit their ends. And so it becomes clever language to prop up the angling for leadership. But once it's attained, and that's why we were saying that, power reveals the true character of people. So, like even in America, where you have the Republicans and the Democrats, and they have, some are conservative and liberals. Over history, positions that Democrats had at one point in history were Republican at another point in history, and vice versa. So people might be surprised to learn that, for instance, if I'm not wrong, the anti-slavery party, people would be tempted to say that it was the Democrats, but it was actually the Republicans. Yeah, and you see that over time, they're just switching positions to suit the context of the time. So, as opposed to even saying maybe having a system of two ideologies, maybe what we should even say, I can't believe I'm about to say this, is that all our elected leaders should be independents.
At what?
Yes, come with your character. Si ati kujificha nyuma ya chama alafu nomination huyu anatolewa anachaguliwa and then, but really if you ask people, our current political parties, what do they stand for?
I could say there are some parties that stand for some things.
How many seats do they have?
They don't have the seats.
Exactly. So but if you come as an independent, you say this is what and that way mukienda parliament, you're not going to the leader of a political party to acquire his entire vehicle. You mnamenyana on ideas, and it as a way of
I see
bringing a certain order out of that.
Yeah, I see the pro. I see the positive in what you are saying. And perhaps we should just have an episode just talking about what really is the role of political parties and how we could perhaps think of how we can progress these guys, these political parties and their formations to better progress our politics. But now, as we come to the close of this episode, we've talked about all like tying the thread into our history in terms of how the law is used for political means, and more so in the case of the disagreements between a president and his principal assistant, which is deputy president. What precedents, or what do you see? What do you think will forecast this where we currently are tied to now, without looking at it in isolation of where we are right now? What do you think will happen in future? What precedents does this set? 10, 20 years from now, what do you see?
Looking into my crystal ball, as a famous professor is known to say. That's a very tricky question. Let me table something very radical. Part of what is happening with the information age and the age of AI, the scripture told us that there would be a time when there would be an increase in knowledge. I think we're coming to that time. Part of what is happening is that you have an acceleration. 3 or so generations ago, 4 generations ago, what it would take, what would happen over a year, 5 years, 10 years, now in present times is being done in a day, an hour, and the like, and even how this information. So we're living in a time of acceleration.
Yeah.
What that means is what 10 to 20 years means looking forward is not what 10 to 20 years looking forward would have meant at independence. So with every decade, look at it as a century. Now, what's the radical idea I want to table in light of that context of acceleration? In the same way with our last point where I'm saying maybe let's not take it for granted that we must have political parties.
Yes.
Let me also say, what I said, not that I prefer one or the other, let me also say that our current global system of the nation state is not something that we should take for granted as something that has to be there. Meaning our system of countries, Kenya as a country, Tanzania as a country,
can be changing.
It can be, our entire systems of government can change because when you look at the history of human existence, this phenomenon of the nation state is actually still in its infancy and is still very experimental. So let's not take for granted that in 10 to 20 years we will know Kenya as it is. Let's not take for granted that We will have a system of presidents, senators, governors, and MPs. I mean, for the last 20 to 30 years, 20 years, you've had an effort towards an East Africa Federation, for instance. That's a conversation that's been happening. Yes, it started post-independence.
Way back, yeah.
You had the Nkurumas who had Pan-Africanism
Visions
and the
of,
like.
yeah.
So 10 to 20 years, basically, all I'm saying is, because sometimes even what limits our imagination is that we think that all that there is all that there is going to be. It should be.
Yeah.
But if not only should we think outside the box, let's think without the box entirely and see what
Okay.
solutions come to the center.
That's true. I think for me, what I see as moving forward, I could not say what precedents this has set, but more and more with what you're saying is an increase of information, is that now we are forced to look at the person or the people based on their character. You cannot hide behind a political party. You cannot hide behind an association anymore. I think with more information and the access of information, AI and everything, people are now looking at the character. I'm seeing that there will be more of a stark divide between what is right and what is wrong and what is acceptable. So leaders will be emerging based on those. Nene, so perhaps what you're saying, yeah, we may do away with political parties altogether, but at the end of the day, the form of governance or the people put in those on these powerful positions will be truly based on character. We will be seeing them for who they are, and the people that follow them will be outwardly saying that, yes, I stand for this, or I don't stand for this, or I accept this character because I am of this character. I feel like we are moving more into a point where there's a stark divide and it is a choice to be made. And it's not about whether you're part of this progressive party. It's now based on what character does Chaka have that I see in myself? Yeah, which is interesting. Like, I don't know whether, I do see it as a positive thing. I do not know, I cannot envision it in the current system that we have now. I see that things are going to change completely. And these unprecedented times truly are unprecedented times. And it calls for us to be, what you said, courageous, number one, and apply our thinking completely outside the limitations of the box. Yeah, and act like there's no box, kabisa, just as you said. Yeah.
No, I think what I'd add to that is, part of the reason I ask such questions or pose such perspectives, I do believe in political parties. So it may not necessarily be to get rid of them entirely. But it's only, I think, when we pose those questions in such a way that we then ask ourselves, actually, what was the purpose of this thing to begin with? That way we can have an honest conversation about it.
How we
Because
organize.
actually, through political party systems and what you've even talked about, ideology, if people voted for political parties based on their ideology as opposed to personalities, and then that those political parties had nominees, and so then through the power of numerical representation, you fill party lists and the like, you may have a situation where people are looking to what is being represented rather than who is representing. So there are different ways of looking at it, but unless we have a conversation about it, because thematically for me, and let me invite myself to a parting shot. Thematically for me, part of the thing is, and I'll find better ways of putting this going forward, but for now, let me simply say that there is the thing, there is what the thing is meant to do, and there is how the thing is actually used.
Okay.
So there is, for instance, There is the constitution.
Yeah.
There is what it is meant to achieve.
Yeah.
And then there is how it is being used.
Yeah.
And so using that with many other things is this system of government. What is it? What is it meant to achieve? And is it being used in the way that it is meant to be used?
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of the hoodwinking is happening.
Coming. Yeah.
We are not being honest about. People will stand in our houses of parliament and tell us that we are doing this thing because of these values, and mtu amelipwa mita 10 juu ya 5.
Yeah.
Alafu unakuja kutuambia
Ameunda tu narrative.
I believe in the future of this country. Kumbe is the future of your bank account.
Yeah, that by pitching this person, we will solve all of Kenya's problems. That is the sole reason as to where we are at right now.
There is a thing, what it is meant to achieve, and how it is actually used.
Yeah. I still think character is at the center of it. I'm not just speaking on the essence of, based on what we saw of the impeachment. It's just that is the most recent memory of when we see the public being hoodwinked and such glorious statements are made that, Kenya is greater. It's a great country and we are defending Kenya. You guys just don't know
The same
it.
people who are saying they're rejecting tribalism are...
Hey, the kingpins of their villages. Anyway, that was an interesting. I actually did not see us going this direction, by the way, in the beginning. I had a plan, but I guess the discussion got...
We removed the box.
We removed the box and just went the direction. Yeah. So... maybe the next episode we should talk about those political parties and how we govern ourselves. Like we need to start asking ourselves, what is the purpose of this thing? Yeah. So thank you for tuning in to Politically Connected. I hope you feel more connected to our politics and be engaged, because our aim here really is to Chaka, what is our aim?
Raise the civic consciousness of the African continent. Or awaken the civic consciousness.
Chaka, because I can't believe I went blank.
There's something I was reading this morning, and it was somebody who was saying the reason we question the world as it is so that we can be able to imagine the world as it should be.
Wow.
That's what we do here.
We cannot say anything after what Bishop has said. We'll see you in the next episode. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and if you have any ideas or any topics you want us to discuss, feel free to find us in the comment section, because that's where the action happens. See you next time.